Aaron Lawson had always been fascinated by crime. Ever since he was a child, he devoured mystery novels, watched detective shows, and imagined himself solving unsolvable cases. Now in his mid-30s, that passion had evolved into a full-fledged hobby. By day, Aaron worked a steady job in IT, managing networks and troubleshooting issues for a variety of clients. But by night, he was something else entirely, an amateur detective poring over cold cases, disappearances, and unsolved murders. He wasn't a professional investigator, just someone with an intense curiosity and an analytical mind. His wife, Evelyn, found his obsession curious but charming. A nurse who worked night shifts at the local hospital, she often came home to find Aaron hunched over his laptop. Crime scene photos, police reports, and newspaper clippings spread across his desk. "Anything exciting tonight, Sherlock?" she'd tease with a smile, setting down her bag as she leaned in to kiss him on the cheek. "Just trying to solve another one," Aaron would reply, his focus still glued to the screen. It had become a part of their routine, Evelyn working late into the night, Aaron sinking deeper into his cases, their lives intersecting for a few hours in the early mornings. She seemed to enjoy his dedication, often asking questions or offering snippets of information she'd heard at the hospital. It was a comforting rhythm they had, one that brought them closer in its own way. But recently, things had taken a darker turn. Their quiet suburban life had been disrupted by a series of brutal murders happening in their city. A serial killer was on the loose, targeting men and leaving behind gruesome crime scenes that seemed impossible to decipher. The media was in a frenzy, and the police were at a loss. Every victim was found alone in their home, with no signs of forced entry and no apparent connection between them. Naturally, Aaron became obsessed. He followed every news report, every police update, and began collecting as much information as he could. Evelyn, too, seemed fascinated. She'd often come home from her shifts and share rumors she'd heard at the hospital, details about the victims, speculation about the killer's methods. "Did you hear about the latest one?" she asked one evening, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and something else Aaron couldn't quite place. "They found him on Maple Street. No signs of a break-in, just like the others." Aaron nodded, already aware. He'd been studying the case for hours, trying to understand how the killer was selecting his targets. "It's like the killer knows them," he muttered. "That's the only explanation. There's no struggle, no forced entry. Whoever this is, they know how to get close to the victims without raising suspicion." Or maybe, Evelyn said, her tone casual, "they're just very good at blending in." Something about the way she said it made Aaron pause, but he brushed it off. She had a point after all. A killer who could slip in and out without being noticed had to be skilled in manipulation, in hiding in plain sight. It was a chilling thought, but one that made sense. Aaron's frustration grew as the killings continued. The police seemed no closer to catching the killer, and every lead he followed turned into a dead end. He became more engrossed in the case than ever before, spending hours feeding data into an AI system he had been experimenting with. The AI analyzed patterns, sifted through reports, and began generating possible connections and profiles. Weeks passed, and Evelyn's interest in the case grew as well. She started asking Aaron more detailed questions about the investigation, almost as if she was just as invested as he was. "Do you think the police are even close to catching him?" she asked one night, leaning over his shoulder as he scrolled through crime scene photos. Aaron shook his head. "Not even close. But they'll slip up. Killers like this always do. They think they're smarter than everyone else. But eventually, they make a mistake." "Maybe they won't," Evelyn said, her voice soft, almost too soft. "Maybe this one is smarter than you think." Aaron glanced at her, uneasy. There was something in her voice, a calmness that unsettled him. But she smiled, as if it were just a casual conversation, and kissed him on the cheek before heading off to bed. As the weeks passed, Aaron began to notice small things that didn't add up. The AI had been analyzing data for hours every night, and it started to reveal unsettling patterns, connections between the victims that Aaron hadn't seen before. One victim had lived near Evelyn's hospital. Another had visited the same neighborhood on nights she worked. Aaron dismissed these findings at first, thinking they were mere coincidences, but the AI kept refining its analysis, narrowing down suspects and generating profiles. Then, one night, Aaron sat alone in the glow of his laptop, and the AI spat out a name that froze him in place. Evelyn Lawson. It couldn't be right. Aaron stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no way the AI could be serious. Evelyn? His wife? It had to be a mistake, some error in the system. But the AI had drawn logical conclusions based on the data. The times of the murders, the victims' locations, and the profiles matched Evelyn's movements too perfectly. Every murder had taken place on a night she worked, or when she could have slipped away unnoticed. Aaron felt a sickening dread settle in his stomach. He'd never suspected her, not once. Evelyn was the most loving, attentive, and caring person he knew. But as he replayed the past few months in his head, his mind raced. How often had she seemed to know too much about the murders? How many times had she mentioned details that weren't public yet? And how had she been so calm, so collected when discussing them? He didn't want to believe it, but the more he thought about it, the more everything seemed to fall into place. Aaron's hands shook as he closed the laptop and tried to breathe. He couldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed proof, something solid. If he was wrong, if this was just some horrible mistake, he'd never forgive himself for accusing her. But if he was right, he glanced at the bedroom door, half expecting her to walk out, to catch him in his moment of doubt. His pulse quickened, and his heart raced as he struggled to figure out what to do next. He needed to investigate her further, quietly, without tipping her off. He had to be smart, methodical, like the killer he was chasing. As Aaron planned his next move, he heard the unmistakable click of the front door opening. Evelyn was home. His breath caught in his throat as she called out from the hallway, her voice cheerful, warm. "Aaron, you still up?" He quickly shut his laptop and tried to compose himself. "Yeah," he called back, his voice strained. "Just working on something." Evelyn stepped into the living room, smiling as she always did, her face soft and familiar. But now, everything about her seemed sinister to Aaron. The way she moved, the way her eyes seemed to study him. She approached him, her footsteps unnervingly quiet in the stillness of the house. "You've been at this case for weeks," she said softly. "Anything new?" Aaron forced a smile, his heart racing. "Nothing major," he lied, hoping his voice didn't betray his fear. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her eyes lingering on him. "You'll figure it out. You always do." There was something in her tone, something that made Aaron's skin crawl. He could see it now, the way she watched him, the subtle shift in her posture, the calmness in her voice. She knew. She had to know, and she was waiting. "I think I'll go for a walk," Aaron said suddenly, standing up too quickly. His pulse was pounding, and he needed to get out to think. "Clear my head." Evelyn didn't move, just kept her eyes on him as she spoke. "At this hour?" she asked, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "It's late. I'll be quick," Aaron replied, already moving toward the door. "Don't stay out too long," she said quietly, her voice following him out like a shadow. Aaron stepped into the night air, his mind reeling, his hands shaking. He had to find a way to prove it, to confirm what the AI had told him. But how? He couldn't go to the police with an AI's findings. They'd think he was crazy. He needed something more, something real. As he paced through the darkened streets, panic set in. If Evelyn was the killer, he was living with a monster. And if she suspected that he knew, he wasn't safe. After what felt like hours, Aaron returned home, his heart still racing. The house was silent. He walked through the darkened hallway, his breath catching in his throat when he saw the faint light coming from his office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he saw Evelyn sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop. "You're so clever, Aaron," she said without turning around. "I knew you'd figure it out." Aaron's blood ran cold as he stepped back, his heart pounding in his ears. Evelyn stood up slowly and turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes dark with something he'd never seen before. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered, taking a step toward him. "But I can't let you stop me." Aaron's vision blurred as Evelyn pulled something from her bag. A knife glinted in the dim light, and all rational thought fled his mind. He stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. "Evelyn, please," he cried, raising his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. "We can talk about this." "Talk," she echoed, her voice tinged with a chilling softness. "What's it to talk about? You were so close, Aaron. You could have joined me. But now you have to understand." She lunged at him, and instinct kicked in. Aaron ducked, narrowly avoiding the blade as it slashed through the air where he had been standing. In a moment of sheer panic, he turned and fled down the hallway, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He dashed into the kitchen, his mind racing as he frantically searched for something, anything, that could help him. The door was locked, and the windows were sealed shut. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he heard Evelyn's footsteps behind him, calm and measured. "You can't run forever, Aaron," she called, her tone almost teasing. "You'll just tire yourself out." He spotted a heavy frying pan on the counter and grabbed it, turning to face her as she entered the kitchen. "Stay back," he shouted, raising the pan like a shield. Evelyn stopped, her expression unreadable. "You really think that will help? You're still just a puzzle piece, Aaron, and I'm the one who puts it all together." Aaron's heart raced as he backed away. He had to buy time, had to find a way out. "You don't have to do this," he pleaded. "We can get help. We can fix this." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, her expression softened, almost as if she were considering his words. But then it vanished, replaced by that chilling smile. "Fix it? I am fixing it. You just don't understand." As she advanced, Aaron swung the pan, desperation fueling his movements. He struck her arm, and she staggered back, the knife clattering to the floor. In that moment, he seized the opportunity and bolted for the door. He fumbled with the lock, his hands trembling, heart racing. Finally, the door burst open, and he stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath. The cool air hit him like a wave, and he ran. The street was empty as he sprinted down the block, adrenaline pumping through his veins. But where could he go? The city was dark, and he felt like he was being hunted. He could hear her footsteps behind him, echoing in the silence, a predator on his trail. Panic set in. He needed to reach a safe place, to warn someone, but all he could think of was the knife, the way she had looked at him, the cold certainty in her voice. He could still hear her taunts echoing in his mind. Suddenly, he spotted a light ahead, another house, a flickering porch light. Desperate, he sprinted toward it, banging on the door with all his might. "Help, please, let me in," he shouted. But there was no answer. He pounded again, feeling the panic rising. Behind him, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. He glanced back, his heart racing as he spotted Evelyn, her figure silhouetted against the streetlight, moving with eerie calm. With a surge of adrenaline, Aaron turned and ran again, adrenaline pushing him forward. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to escape. His legs burned as he sprinted through the darkened streets, desperate to put distance between himself and the nightmare he had once called home. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was always just behind him, waiting for the moment he would tire, waiting to strike. As he dashed around a corner, he spotted an alleyway and ducked into it, pressing his back against the cool brick wall. He struggled to catch his breath, listening intently for the sound of her footsteps. The world around him was silent, and for a moment, he dared to hope he had lost her. But then he heard it, the soft sound of footsteps echoing down the alley. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice shaky. "You don't have to do this. We can talk." But the only answer was silence, heavy and oppressive. He leaned against the wall, trying to control his breathing, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. Then, in the stillness, he heard a soft laugh. It sent chills down his spine. "You really think you can run from me, Aaron?" Evelyn's voice drifted through the shadows, calm and collected. "You know me better than that." He felt the world tilt beneath him as fear clawed at his insides. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. And in that moment, as he realized the truth, he understood he had played her game, but now the tables had turned. She was the predator, and he was the prey. With nowhere else to go, Aaron stepped out from the shadows, ready to face the reality of the nightmare he had been too blind to see. He had to confront her, to find a way to survive. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be easy. The woman he loved had become someone else entirely, and there was no telling what she might do next. In the end, it wasn't just a battle of wits. It was a struggle for his life, a fight against the darkness he had once thought could never touch him. And as he stood there, heart pounding, he braced himself for whatever came next.